Well, thank you very much for joining us. My name is Jim Woods, and I'm honored to have with us today Kevin Knebl. And Kevin is an international speaker, leadership expert, and a coach. He is an extraordinary man that is highly gifted, and I can't thank you enough for being with us today. Kevin, how are you, my friend?
Thank you, Jim. It's wonderful to be here. If I were any better, my name would be Jim Woods.
Well, that's good. I don't know how to respond to that. That's very good. That's very good. I'm not usually lost for a word, okay, unless I'm speaking to my wife. But otherwise, that's very good, my friend. Thank you. Well, it's so good to have you here finally. Tell me about your week. What's been going on out there with the things that are happening in the workplace and society?
My week. What a good question. Well, Happy New Year. So
Yes.
part of this week was the beginning of a new year. I've been busy working this week with coaching clients all across the USA and also in England. I'm currently in the midst of writing another book with a dear friend of mine who's a fellow international speaker who lives north of Seattle. So he and I are working on a book project. I just booked tickets to go see a Rush tribute band in Golden, Colorado in about 2 weeks. And I'm psyched that it's Friday. So that's my week.
Well, that's good. So tell me about your new book.
Okay. I have a great friend named Mark Mattison, Matteson, lives a little bit north of Seattle. He's written 7 or 8 books, and we've been close friends for about a decade. We're both huge personal development junkies, and we're both huge fans of Dale Carnegie and Earl Nightingale and Napoleon Hill. So what Mark and I are doing is we're writing a book updating How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie with modern current examples of the 30 principles that are in that book.
Yes.
So we're giving, of course, all the credit to Dale Carnegie. We're just giving more modern examples of those principles, and we're having a ball doing it. So we should be done with that probably in the next 60 days, and it should be on bookshelves maybe by the summer.
That's wonderful. So tell me, when you're trying to update the book, uh, has it been challenging for you? Trying to get over some of the anecdotes and so on, the behaviors, the aphorisms of that period?
That's a really good question. On one hand, yes, and on the other hand, no. So on the one hand, you want to give the respect to Dale Carnegie that he deserves. So you want to make sure that you're using the right aphorisms, anecdotes, examples. And on the other hand, it's really not hard at all, because the principles that Dale Carnegie has in that book are so timeless that even though that book was written in 1936, technology has changed a lot since 1936, but human nature hasn't really changed much in the last couple thousand years. So it's not hard to find examples. Like the first principle in the book is don't criticize, condemn, or complain. And people were criticizing, condemning, and complaining way before Jesus, probably said, Adam was probably criticizing, condemning,
Yes.
and complaining, right? So, and if the world is still around a couple thousand years from now, I'm sure there will be people still doing that. So on one hand, it's not hard to find current examples of human nature. On the other hand, you just want to make sure that you're not cheapening it, minimizing it. You want to make sure that you're giving good, concrete examples that stand the test of time.
Well, I would agree with you. I've read the book a number of times over the years, and a few days ago, while I'm doing my house cleaning, my
Yeah.
wife and I have a rule here. Okay, we have a large home, just the two of us and the dog and puppy, and so I do a lot of the cleaning in the house, and she does a lot
Yeah.
of other things. We separate the duties.
Sure.
But I've listened to this tape the other day, and I was listening to Oprah on Stanford University graduate school, and she mentioned the principles of that book
Yeah.
without mentioning the name, but I recognize the principles. And one of them was that I know in the book I think he mentions that everybody likes to hear the sound of their own name. Am I correct?
Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language.
And some people may eschew that and think, oh, that's terribly old fashioned. But
Oh,
Oprah
no.
mentioned her success principles, the things that guided her as a young lady interviewed her. And one of those was that everybody wants to be loved. They
Yes.
want to know that they're appreciated. They want to know they're respected. Even the most vile person wants that. They want to
Yes.
know that they have met with somebody's approval. And I found it really fascinating to think about it later on that, no matter what we do, we're all very much alike.
What we are so much more alike than we are we're so much more similar than dissimilar. And
Yes.
we live in a world where people get faked out. And like you're black and I'm white. If we were to look, I'm not a scientist, but if you were to look at the DNA between you and I would predict, and I could be wrong, but I would predict we're probably 98 to 99% the same. Now, the color of our skin might be different. You're clearly far more handsome than me, but I don't set the bar very high. Okay. So we get faked out. We look at people, oh, I'm male, she's female. Why are we making such a big deal of the 1% that's different? Jim, you and I have never spoken before, but I'm going to predict a couple things and tell me if I'm right or wrong. You love your family.
Yes.
So do I. You don't willingly want to break any laws.
That's correct.
Me neither. You would like to treat people the way you would want to be. I mean, this is just common sense, right?
Yes.
But we live in a world where people innocently forget that, and they focus on things that are so minor, and they turn these molehills into mountains. And it's really healthy to remember as we interact with other human beings that we really are so much more similar than different.
Yes. I remember, Kevin, in my sociology class as an undergraduate at this university, and the professor, but Volkswagen came out with a commercial years ago that said, in this world, we need drivers and we need passengers.
Yeah.
And so I remember being very competitive at the time and mentioned that to the instructor in a paper. And he brought it up in a class. And he said that, Mr. Woods, so you think that competitiveness is important, but you should be commanding over everyone? I said, no, sir. And then he went on to tell me the value of everyone. And then he mentioned this, which I found in a book in the library.
Yeah.
It was actually researched. And it has this basis on what you're talking about right now. And in the research, it was discovered that we are all, no matter where we live in the world, no more than 1/8 cousins. Now think about that for just a minute. Think about it. I looked at it. When he told me that, I had to immediately run to the research department, the library, and
Yeah.
find the book.
Yeah.
I read it, and it gave evidence that we're no more than 1/8 cousin. Just think about that, the gravity of it around the world.
Yes.
We're picking fights with our own family.
The only reason that people have challenges is because they forget what they are. That's it. Now that sounds very deep and profound. It's not. People innocently forget what they themselves are, and by extension, they forget what other people are too.
Yes. You think the noise is so loud sometimes that it's cacophonous that we want to be heard? I mean, we want to be heard in social media, but we felt the same way long before social media. We want people to hear us, and we want to be understood, even if at our greatest level. We want someone to say, you know what, you have value, you matter to us. So we pick out the Facebook likes or the Twitter followers and so on as something that justify, or TikTok justify our importance. But we just really want to know that, how am I doing?
Yes. Yeah, you're pointing at something very profound. Nowadays, I'm a really, really simple guy. And that doesn't mean I'm stupid. I'm just simple.
Yes.
And one of the reasons why I'm simple is because years ago, I started to notice that I never have had a problem in any area of my life: finances, relationships, health, spirituality. I've never had a problem or a challenge that I solved by adding complexity to it. Now I'm pausing for effect because we live in a world that would like to convince us that complexity is the answer. And isn't it ironic that there's no evidence to support that? So you're saying something very profound, and that is 1,000 years ago, people wanted likes and comments and shares just like we do on Facebook now. But back in those days, the technology didn't support that. But the psychology behind it is exactly the same, right?
Yes.
It's about approval. It's about peer pressure. It's about all this stuff. It's just that now, if I kind of look at the world, and the only thing that's really changed in thousands of years is technology. If you really let that sink in, I'm not talking to you, Jim. I'm talking to the person in the future that's watching this. Hi, people in the future. that the only thing that's really changed is technology. So don't get fooled by the technology. Focus on what doesn't change. And you just nailed it. People want to be loved. They want to love and be loved. They want to be appreciated. Even the worst criminal in the world wants that, even though they might not look like they do, but adults are just kids with long, hairy legs. That's all they are. Yes. And technology changes, but human nature really doesn't change. And it really helps. It's very practical. This isn't some woo-woo new age psychology we're talking about. This is practical stuff. When you realize every interaction with another human being, whether it's online, offline, face-to-face, email, phone call, whatever, every human being that you're communicating with is seeking at least appreciation. It really helps, and it's very practical to remember that.
It is. I guess we have to get out of our own way to do that. You
Yeah.
know, Kevin, years ago, if I might, a few years ago, well, actually many years ago, when I was a salesperson at 3M company, I can remember driving from Torrance, California area towards the southern part of it and going back into the city heart of it itself. And
Yeah.
it was on a Friday and the freeway was really backed up. And my boss said that, Jim, someone just called downtown Los Angeles and they want to buy one of our copiers. So I was excited. Towards the end of the month, I wanted this sale.
Yeah.
And I'm working straight commission with the family, and also I run over there, so to speak, not really run. Okay.
Yeah.
It takes a long ways to get through the traffic. So I finally get there, and the woman says, Mr. Woods, he's been waiting all day for you to come here. He's excited to buy from you folks. I get there, and mentally I'm calculating how much money I'm going to take home. So he comes out after waiting a long time. He comes out and he looks at me in the ante room, and he doesn't say a word. He looks at me, closes the door, and leaves. And I'm wondering what happened. Nobody says a word.
What's up with
Secretary says, I'm so sorry, Mr. Woods. And I leave, take the long, sad drive back to the office. The sales manager is still there waiting for me. He said, the man called. He wants somebody else to come out and sell him the machine as soon as possible. I said, what did I do? He took me to his office and he taught me a lesson. It was more than 30 years ago, and I have never forgotten it. And it set the pattern for the rest of my life. He said, Jim, he didn't like you because you're Black, but I want you to recognize this, so you don't carry it as a chip on your shoulder the rest of your life.
Yeah.
He said, if you have been really, really good, you could have sold him. Now think about it. Think about that for just a moment. He's right, isn't he? Isn't he right?
The world, you know what? Let's just say it the way it is. There's some walking brain donors out there. Okay.
Yes, but it's okay with me, because I thought the rest of my life, I thought to myself, you know what? I don't remember anything in that story about really necessarily being Black. But what I remember in the story, all these years I retold the story, is that if I had been really good enough, I could have still sold him. It didn't matter. The man, whatever the man meant, he had his bias in something, and his bias probably had nothing with the color of my skin.
Right.
It could have been something misrepresentation of a long time ago, and I don't really care.
Yep.
The only point is that he taught me a lesson that has to do with everything I have ever done ever since that it made me a better person. And I don't think a thing is about black and white or anything. It could be gender. It could be because you went to a different school. It could be
Yep,
because you've been divorced or you've been
yep,
bankrupt.
yep,
Whatever it is,
yep.
you got to say, if I've been really on my game, it puts
There,
the onus back on us.
there's a tremendous amount of wisdom in what you just said. Tremendous amount. I'll say something that's going to sound woo-woo, and we certainly don't have enough time to unpack it, but we are never upset for the reason that we believe that we are.
Yes.
Now, there are many people that will hear me say that and go, Kevin's lost it. No, I haven't lost it. Maybe examine what I'm saying a little bit. We are never upset for the reason we believe that we are. Let that one sink in, folks. Okay. The person that treated Jim that way that day didn't really have an issue with Jim.
Right.
That person had an internal issue that they were unaware of, and Jim just happened to be the poor guy that was standing at the door at the time.
I would agree. Yes.
And when we understand that, that doesn't mean we condone bad behavior, but it does create compassion. I'll give you an example. What, you have children, Jim?
I do. Yes.
Okay. So when your children were little, or maybe they still are little, I don't know, but when you have a little child, I'm going to guess at some point your little child had a bad dream, probably came into your bedroom crying and saying there's a monster under the bed or something. And at that moment, you had a couple of choices in front of you. You could have said, hey, stupid, monsters don't exist, get back in bed. But you would never say that. You could have said, sit down and let me give you a dissertation on the non-existence, an intellectual treatise on the non-existence of monsters, but you wouldn't do that either. What happened, and tell me if I'm right or wrong, what happened was you realized something that the child didn't realize. You realized that monsters don't exist, but you also realized that to the child, the monster was as real as anything else. And that automatically triggered your compassion. And because you saw through the illusion that the child didn't see through. And you probably said to the kid, climb in the bed with mom and I, everything's going to be okay, sleep here tonight. So you didn't go the route of, hey, stupid, get back in bed. You didn't sit him down and try to teach him some deep, profound lesson on life. You just exhibited compassion. And there's a lesson in that, right? So when people treat us poorly, it's really not about us. It's something they're dealing with. And we can either hit them head on, and maybe sometimes it is the appropriate thing to do that. You know, if somebody invades your country, I'm not saying sit back and be a doormat, right? Or maybe sometimes it's appropriate to have an intellectual conversation, but probably most of the time it's not. Usually what most people need is just some compassion. They need some, when you understand that people are dealing with their own crap, doesn't mean you condone bad behavior, but it does create compassion because you understand that they're having a nightmare that they consider to be real.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. I have one more question for you. Do you think it's possible that we can be filled so much with compassion with trying to gain forgiveness from other people about some mishap or so,
Yeah.
that we fail to have enough compassion for ourselves? We fail to forgive ourselves?
Yeah. My fast answer is absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Most people, would you agree with me, Jim, that, and by the way, a good thing for you to know about me is I never, ever, ever, ever ask trick questions. The reason I'm putting that disclaimer in before I ask you this question is because often I ask questions that are so simple, people think I'm trying to trick them.
Yes.
And then I tell them, no, I'm trying to show you how you're overthinking, okay? Would you agree with me, Jim, that people tend to become more knowledgeable about things they invest time in studying, and they are less knowledgeable about things that they don't invest time in studying.
Yes.
Okay, I think that's pretty common sense, right?
Right.
I would predict if you were to walk out on the street right now and take a survey of all the people passing by, and you were to ask them, how much time have you invested in studying your own mind and your thinking process? You would hear crickets, which would be an indication that it is very naive to think that you have any understanding of how your mind and thought works if you've never spent any time studying it. Now, what does that have to do with what you just asked me? How does everything to do with it? Because no wonder most people struggle to forgive themselves, because they've never spent any time figuring out what the hell they are.
Yes.
Which I was pointing to 10 minutes ago. The reason that people struggle is because they really don't understand who they are. I'm not saying they're stupid. I'm just saying, and you just verified it. It is common sense to know that we become knowledgeable about things we study, and we tend to have less knowledge about things we don't study. If we have not studied who we are, how the mind works, and how thought works, what basis do we have to assume that we have any idea what the heck's going on?
Well, Kevin, before you don't know, but before the war began with Russia and Ukraine, the lights would go off in Ukraine. Not often, but it'll go off more often than it typically does in the States, maybe once a week or so.
Yeah.
And sometimes, or the water would be turned off, and sometimes it'd be 4 hours or so on. But one night, the electricity went off, and then we were sitting in the dark. And this has to do with certainly what you were just saying, is that there, my wife and I, we didn't have any distractions. The internet was off, the router didn't work, the television was off. We had nothing to do but sit there and just talk. And while we were talking, we didn't have any distractions whatsoever. It's amazing how much we became exposed with each other. I don't mean exposed to their own feelings about each other and about ourselves.
Yeah.
And how we were willing to relate those to each other.
How
a lot
beautiful.
of times we just don't make the time to remove the distractions out of our lives so we can hear it.
Yeah. The fish doesn't know it's wet.
No, it does not.
Yeah.
And I think that overall,
and that was a blessing for you and your wife.
it was a tremendous blessing.
And wouldn't that be an example that quite often what appears to be a challenge, and I'm not talking about spinning things in a positive way, what appeared initially to be a challenge actually was a blessing in disguise. And I think if you take that and you understand that, what isn't a blessing in disguise? The question is, are we awake enough? I'm not talking about being woke, but are we awake enough to realize that we are a mosquito in a nudist colony of opportunity?
Yes.
We are surrounded with blessings 24/7, 365, if we only are awake enough to see it.
You sound like Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning in this concentration camp, but he left there with his sanity, so to speak, and revealed all of us that is where in our thinking is where we are.
My father actually grew up. My father actually grew up in a concentration camp.
Oh, really?
I'm not Jewish. A lot of people think that only Jews were in concentration camps. That is not true at all. My father woke up in his mother's dead arms in a concentration camp when he was about 7 years old. So when you talk about Viktor Frankl, who I'm very familiar with who that is, you're correct. Viktor Frankl had every choice taken away from him except for one choice: his attitude.
Yes.
That's true. Matter of fact, the way it looks to me, even though we live in a culture that tries to tell you to control everything, which, by the way, you can't, there's only really two things you can control. You can control your work ethic, and you can control your attitude. And by the way, those are the only two things you really need to control.
Yes.
So if we control our work ethic and we control our attitude, I'm not saying life's going to be a bed of roses and we're going to go skipping through fields of daisies together. But if Viktor Frankl could do it in a concentration camp, you and I can do it in the world's greatest country with more opportunity than has ever been in existence.
Touche. For me personally, my attitude has impacted how people treat me. And it's why I see good people everywhere.
Yeah, because they are good people.
They are indeed
That
good
doesn't
people.
mean they exhibit good behavior all the time. But God doesn't make any junk, right? When you see somebody who's acting in an unkind way, they have innocently forgotten what they are. And that
Yes.
creates compassion.
Indeed, my friend, we lose sight of our own capabilities sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm glad that you're out there and you're awakening people to what they can do, what's possible.
Yeah.
Now, I think the best way for people to reach you and learn more about your book and your work and invite you into their corporations, especially as a one-of-a-kind coach, I think let me see if I'm a psychic today. I think they should probably reach you at kevinknebl.com.
No, they can't find me, man. I'm in the witness relocation program,
Well, that is
so
true. You are hard to find. And for those that don't know, Knebl is kind of like, it's spelled similar to knife, okay?
yeah, exactly. It's 5 letters. Could I please buy another vowel? Knebl. Kevin Knebl. Yes, you're correct. I'm easily findable. Type my name into Google, find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. My website is kevinknebl.com. I'm certainly not in the witness relocation program, although I was born and raised in New Jersey.
Yeah, so for some people, they don't understand that joke. If you still go to the post office, you may see his photograph there on one of the listings, all right? I'm not saying which one.
Exactly. Jim, I have so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much.
We will talk again, my friend, okay?
Yeah, I'm really
You take
looking
care of
forward
yourself.
to that.
Hey, tonight is Friday night and it's our family pizza night, okay? We make homemade pizza tonight, honed over many, many years, and we don't have any real Italian tomatoes here in the part of Calgary that we're in, but nevertheless, we're gonna go in there and make our best and have a fun evening. You do the same, okay?
Thank you, brother. God bless.
You too. We'll talk again, my friend.
Okay. See ya.
Bye-bye.